completely scrapped my talk, what I was going to say. And believe me, that hurts me more than it hurts you. So I'm saying this more as an appeal. Anybody who wants the full text, you can email me. Particularly the piece I'm leaving out is the piece I've been working on for a long time. And that has to do with how we change our way of thinking so that we can hear the other. And I call that a metaphoric sensibility. And I have a long riff on Wallace Stevens' poem, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. My riff is 12 ways of looking at a metaphor. So if you want that piece, let me know and I'll send it to you. I've opted for doing what is closest to my heart. So I want to try and stay out of the realm of thinking and ideas as much as I can. Not that I disparage ideas or thinking, but I come to this meeting as both a phenomenologist and a Jungian-oriented psychologist. And for me, psychology is about reminding us of what we have forgotten. That the work of psychology has less to do with discovering new things, although I know there are many psychologists who disagree with me, but if you work from the perspective of the soul, psychology is about helping us to remember what we have forgotten. So it serves a function of anamnesis. And I think in the dialogue that has been developing here with questions about pragmatism and practicality, maybe that's what makes it difficult, because in that respect, psychology is useless, because it doesn't fit the model of what the useful is in pragmatic disciplines. What I do is as useless as a dream. It's as useless as a fantasy. It's as useless as a painting. But you see, what I'm trying to point to is that if you work out of this side, not against the practical disciplines, then there's a different sense of utility. And I'm going to try and stand up for that. It's the utility of remembering. So, let me begin. In 1982, I became seriously concerned with the issue of technology and nature, because as a psychotherapist, I was dealing with adolescents and young adults, and I had 2 teenage sons. And no matter what the diagnosis was, what I was hearing in the consulting room was a sense of despair, a sense of hopelessness in the 80s as we were progressively wiring the world for nuclear destruction during the Reagan years. And that form of despair took the form of a sense of hopelessness. Why continue to do what we are doing? I remember college students saying to me, why should I study for your exam? I mean, apart from the fact that they didn't like my course, why should I study for the exam when tomorrow is not promised? And because it hit home for me with 2 teenage sons, I began to wonder, how is it that we've gotten into this place where we could wire the earth, our home, for destruction? How is that possible? What has changed in our relationship to nature such that we could begin to think of the possibility, to entertain the possibility of destroying the very ground which has stood under us all of these years, the ground that gives us support, the earth where we bury the dead? How could we do that? To me, that was a psychological question that I had to find an answer to. And I did, more or less. I spent 7 years working on a book that came out in 1989 called Technology, a Symptom and Dream. And there's an interesting story about how that originated, but I want to honor the time, so I won't go into that story, about how sometimes our work comes from the most unexpected places. But what I saw was that at the end of the Middle Ages, 1,000 years of Christianity, where the world had been structured in a vertical hierarchical fashion, where there was a sense of the relationship between humanity and the gods, where there was a sense of the imperfection of the earth vis-a-vis the perfection of the cosmos. And where the earth was still animate and alive, so that miners who would dig into the earth would have rituals of purification before they broke the skin of Mother Earth. Somewhere in the 15th, 16th century, the world changed. In that early period of the Renaissance, the world shifted. And I found one of the expressions of that in the development of linear perspective art. Now, I don't have time to go into that. All of that is in the text Technology as Symptom and Dream. But I want to share with you two things about the book, the title. Why call technology a symptom? Because in my practice, 25 years of working with people, and in my own life, struggling with my own vices, Galen pointed out today that we all share that. Now, we all have our vices. And with my patients, I discovered that a symptom is a tension between remembering something that is too vital to forget, while forgetting something that is too painful to remember. In that respect, a symptom is not just a sign of there being something wrong. It is also the pathway home. So I ask myself the question then, if we approach technology as a cultural symptom, what is it about technology symptomatically that is asking us to remember what we have forgotten? Because maybe it's too painful to remember. And then I looked at the origins of technology in linear perspective vision. And believe me, that took a long time. It took me 18 months to read a textbook in painting by Alberti, Du Pictura. I had to find an English translation because my Latin wasn't good enough, and the geometry to master that. But there was something in there that began to shape a new collective dream for humanity. The old vertical world of the Middle Ages began to become a horizontal expansion of infinite space. The closed world of the infinite universe, where we were domed by the canopy of the heavens, suddenly extended itself into an infinite expanse of space. And where were we in relation to that infinite expanse that was way out in front of us? Well, you read Alberti's text, and what you discover is that that is the invention of the modern ego, as a spectator behind a window, looking at nature as a spectacle for our observation and use. It coincides with the rise of the nation states, and it coincides with the rise of materialism. It was a window, a fresh air, a drift of fresh air that opened on the world, because you would not have wanted to live at the end of the Middle Ages under the tyranny of the church. Something had to end. The soul wanted something different. And so at the beginnings of modern technology, there is something new and fresh opening up. And we begin to look at the world from afar. We become a spectator of a world made into a spectacle. And on the other side of that window, also the transformation of the body. No longer as a temple of vice and virtue, no longer as a temple of sin, no longer as a piece of flesh that will either enjoy the glories of heaven or the pains of hell, but the body becomes a specimen. The first textbooks in anatomy coincide in the same year when Copernicus publishes his book on the revolution of the earth around the sun. The body becomes a machine. Spectator, specimen, spectacle. The codes of a new civilization, what I call the collective dreams of a new vision of humanity. And I labeled those dreams, or I described those dreams as dreams of distance, the spectator behind the window. And there's value in that. Sometimes the further away we get from a problem, the better we know it. So there's something beautiful and valuable in that innovation, in that creation. The second dream of disincarnation. The body is a machine, yes, but if in the midst of my talk I turn blue and I clutch my chest and I say I can't breathe, what heart am I pointing to? The heart that was discovered by Harvey shortly after this invention, the heart is a pump. But that's not the same heart as the living symbolic power of the heart that sometimes I wear on my sleeve, or that I give away in love, or that can break in the loss of love. If suddenly I stop my talk and I sigh and I say I can't continue, and you say what's wrong, and I say my wife has just informed me that she's running away with a behaviorist, my heart is broken. I don't want you to call 911 any more than I want you to read me a poem of Rilke if I turn blue and collapse on the floor. But we lost something of that body as the power to create space and not just to be an object in space through this dream of disincarnation. And, why does the psyche have that dream? Why in the Renaissance? Well, what is the body for us? It is the memento mori. It is the constant daily reminder that every life owes a death. It's the constant reminder of death with us all the time. So in some respects, part of the dreams of technology is also a new kind of vision of maybe being able to fly from death, take flight from death by leaving the body behind. As the spirit, as the mind, the spectator behind the window splits itself off from nature and the body. The body belonging to nature is corruptible and dies. And then, of course, what goes with that is the dream of departure. So the dreams of distance, disincarnation, and departure. And all of this I began to wonder about as a psychologist, not about the history of it. I mean, I read people like Carolyn Merchant, and I was so grateful for her book for covering the history of the emergence of science in the Renaissance and other historians. But I wasn't interested so much in the history as I was interested in the symbolic meaning of these actions, their symptomatic value. And so I began to ask myself, what is it in all of these achievements that we have forgotten and are being called to remember? One other point I should make, in leaving the body behind, also part of the dream is taking leave of our senses. I mean, if you make the body into an object over there, into a machine, you lose the sensual body in relation to the sensuous world. Our eyes are not cameras. Our eyes see because the world desires to be seeable. Our ears hear because the world asks to be heard. There is a symbiosis, a love affair, an erotic bond between the sensual or the sensitive flesh and the sensual world. In these dreams of distance, departure, and disincarnation, we take leave of our senses. And putting it that way, we already can begin to hear the symptomatic side. Because if I say of somebody in this group, somebody comes up to me and says, what do you think of someone? And I say, I think they're taking leave of their senses. It carries a connotation. There's a certain madness that comes with the origins of technology, as well as a certain promise, a certain light and a certain darkness. Now, if I can have the first slide, I can illustrate what I've been trying to say. Remember, all of this is about asking, what are we being called to remember? This is what interests me as a psychologist. This is what interests me about all cultural issues. I see them all symptomatically, and I ask myself, not judge it, not is it right or wrong, good or bad, not the politics, not the economics, but symbolically, what is it in this event that we are forgetting and being asked to remember? Maybe one of the most famous photos of the 20th century. I think it's upside down, but that's all right. No, it's all right. The Earth from space.
Would it make any difference?
The Earth from space. Okay, we've all seen that picture. So if you come with me just on this little scenario I've set up, when we look at that photo, what dreams are incarnated there? What are we being asked to remember? What are we being asked to forget? What are we forgetting? Is this a dream of a final farewell? We have the capacity to do that soon, if not right away. And isn't it interesting that at around the same time that we begin to learn the techniques of space flight, we also begin to develop weapons that can destroy the Earth, if not the whole Earth, then much of life, giving ourselves, as it were, a motive to leave? If we have the capacity to destroy our home, doesn't that increase the motive for us for leaving? And if we can leave, doesn't that increase the chances of playing reckless and foolish with the environment, with the Earth, taking chances, running experiments with the only home we have? That's one possible dream, a final farewell. But always, as a psychologist, I'm looking at the other side, the opposite, the tension of opposites. What other dream is possible there? The other thing that has happened with this photo and with spaceflight is that we begin to see the Earth as our home in a way that we've never seen it before. We begin to see that despite all of our differences, political, economic, cultural, that we all inhabit the same blue jewel that floats in the darkness of outer space. So is the dream then that this technology allows, is it a dream of homecoming? I think of the words of the poet T.S. Eliot. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And certainly the achievement that goes with this image has given us wonderful technological ways of seeing the destruction of our climate. So two possibilities. I think the biggest danger in our thinking is either or thinking, because it excludes one and makes the other that you keep the right one. The other then becomes the enemy. Can I have the next slide?
Just quickly before you
Yeah.
get that one, is there any sense, Bob, that it's also, it was like catching sight of our own face in the mirror? I mean, that it, not just as our home, but as us, as our
As
body.
us. Yeah, in the book, Technology, A Sit There and Dream, I go into an old 19th century theory about life being seeded from elsewhere, and I get into that. It's our own face, yeah, that we see. This I want to do very quickly. This is a sculpture by the Dutch artist Paul van Hooijdonk, and it's called A Little Cosmonaut. And he describes this as an image where all human activities have been turned into technical functions. Is this what we become if we only see that first part of the dream that technology allows, a leap into space in which the body that we leave behind, the sensuous body in touch with the alive earth, has become a mechanism? Is this the way then that we imagine the future of who we might become? A new species, in fact, that I would call Homo technologicus economicus. Are we Homo technologicus? 1967, I believe. Okay. And we know that our activities can be turned into technical functions. Breathing can be a matter of the lungs, expelling air and taking air in, but we saw it earlier today that in its symbolic sense, breathing is a matter of inspiration and expiration. The fact that all of us are in this room together and breathing with the entire earth means that we expose each other to the contagion of the other, to the ideas that the other has. You cannot stop it unless you put on a mask, like we are doing now on airplanes, to risk the danger of infection. Has the other become a danger to us? I think it has. Next slide, please. This is a view of Earthrise, seen from the moon. First time in history, the human race, we can stand on a celestial orb and see what we had been taught before, that the earth moves, which we don't experience. This is one of the accomplishments that technology allows. To get a perspective on ourselves that is of great value. Next slide, please. And that's how it's made possible. Liftoff. Liftoff. Can I have the next one? I hope I don't have slides in there I didn't want. No, that's not it. No. That's not it. That's it. Okay. That's an explosion of a hydrogen bomb, I think, at the Bikini Atoll. All right. Can you pull out the one on liftoff?
You want
The space shuttle.
space shuttle. Yep. Here we go.
Two dreams of fire. To be sure, different fires, but still two dreams of fire. One that is constructive and one that is destructive. Both possibilities existing in what we have become as technological human beings. What I am trying to suggest, what moves me most deeply about this, is can we become as a species more conscious of the unconscious aspects of technology without throwing technology away? We cannot become Luddites like in the 19th century, smash the machines. Jonathan Shell wrote a beautiful book in the 1960s called The Fate of the Earth, when he said, we cannot disinvent the bomb. Even if we take all the bombs away, we will always forevermore have to live with the knowledge of how to make them. So the only possibility we have now with the world that we have created with our technological genius and power, or the world that has been created through us at the behest of being or soul or the gods, however you want to speak of it. Ladies and gentlemen, we have only one choice, and that is to learn to live with the dark shadows, the unconscious side of our technological achievement. And I want to make two proposals about how to do that, so you can take these away. One is we have to change our consciousness. We have to change our way of thinking. And that's the part of the talk that I'm going to leave off. Metaphoric thinking. I think that's a powerful tool that gets us out of either or dichotomies. I don't want to get technical here now. I want to try and stay with this first proposal. To learn to live with the powers, almost godlike, now I'm going to need these again, that technology gives us. I think the first step is we have to reclaim the body. We have to develop and recover again an aesthetic sensibility. The word aesthetic means to feel, to sense, and in its root meaning, it means to hear. Aesthetic doesn't mean what is pretty. That's a 17th century corruption. Sometimes the beautiful is terrible, like Rilke says of the angel. So the aesthetic sense means to feel, to sense, and especially to hear. We still capture the meaning of that in the negative, anesthetic. When you have an anesthetic, you stop feeling. So I want to, 5 minutes. Put on the slide, please. No. This one. I was going to talk about Al Gore's film and the images in Al Gore's film. What is our response to them? Fear? Yes. But fear only keeps us divided, us and them. Anger? Yes, but at whom? We all partake of what we are doing. I think grief is a possible way of feeling that breaks the bonds of division and increases our capacity for compassion and sympathy with others who are like us. This is from the LA Times, a 5-part series on the dying of the oceans. This shows a mother calf biting her newborn baby seal because of the increase of a certain kind of acid in the ocean that is built up that is responsible for all of the die-offs of animals. And the effect on some marine mammals is that it enters the brain and breaks the maternal bond. I'm going to ask you, linger for a minute just with this image. It's a fact. And we have to address the fact. How do we reduce these chemicals? But what's your feeling? 50% of us, first of all of us are mammals. And 50% of us know what the maternal bond is. What is our feeling response to what technology has allowed us to do in its dark side? If we linger with the image, can we get in touch with the grief that we feel about what we have done? And then through that, begin to remember the bonds of compassion that link us with the other creatures of the earth. Because after all, we are also mammals. So I'm making a pitch here for an ethics of sorrow as the other side of a technology of progress. An ethics of sorrow that allows us to remember what we are doing, not to punish ourselves with guilt in some American Puritan fantasy, but to learn to grieve, because I have discovered in my own life and working with patients and in culture that grief erases, at least for a moment, the differences that divide us, and where we become heart to heart open with compassion and sympathy for each other. Go to a trauma ward in any hospital, you'll see strangers suddenly beginning to talk to each other. Grief increases our capacity to love. Can I have the next slide? This was also in the LA Times. It's a picture of a fireman in the foreground looking at what's left of one of the towers, 9/11. Again, if we had time, I'd say linger with the image. What is our feeling there? Fear, yes. Anger, yes. But isn't there also the same kind of grief at what we have created and are capable of doing with and to each other? And finally, and I guess I have to stop here, isn't there a connection between this and the sea lion image? What we are doing to nature with our powerful capacities with technology is also what we are doing to ourselves. Our capacity to kill nature, I think, goes hand in hand with our capacity to lose our compassionate hearts. Both are environmental issues, or neither one of them is an environmental issue. I don't think we can pull apart the threads anymore and forget poverty, war, disease as also an environmental problem. And all of them are moral issues which require an ethical epistemology, which was the second part of my proposal. But I'm going to end here. All I've hoped to do is to point out that a psychological approach, at least as I live it and try to live it, is simply to evoke memory in that symptomatic way, to remember what we are in and through our bodies and our connection to earth and what we have forgotten. And in that remembering, learning how to grieve, the consequence of which increases our compassion and our sympathy and our ability to love. Thank you.